Hello, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Founding For podcast. Erica Ayala here. I am excited to have a jam-packed episode. I'm going to recap a little bit of what's happening in the NWHL. We have an interview with Bray Ketchum Peel and also give you a rundown of what is to come. So let's start with, at the top, some NWHL news. First, we have our first two re-signings. We haven't even played the 2020 Isabel Cup final, and we already have players locked and loaded for the 2020-2021 season. First player to re-sign, Kendall Cornine, aka Score9, is returning to the Metropolitan Riveters. The second re-signing that we had was Brooke Wolejko, aka Wolejko, aka she's coming back to the Whale. Brooke Wolejko re-signs for the Connecticut Whale, and our guest on the show today, one Bray Ketchum Peel, talks a little bit about recruiting Brooke and the other goalies and what she's expecting for the Connecticut Whale for next season. Yes, that would be season 6. The NWHL is already preparing for season 6. Speaking of that, if you missed it, NWHL Open Ice had their final show of the season. Although I'm thinking we have to get GamerDoc back once we play the Izzy Cup final, right? Right? Asking for a friend. That friend is me. Anyway, Lindsay had the one, the only, Shelly Picard on the final episode of NWHL Open Ice. If you're not familiar, NWHL Open Ice, it is a talk show that airs on the NWHL Twitch channel. It is hosted by GamerDoc, a physician that works with gamers and now is hosting an NWHL show. Stick taps to GamerDoc, stick taps to Lindsay. I was lucky enough to be on NWHL Open Ice, and I have enjoyed following along. So on NWHL Open Ice, Shelly Picard talks about that, yes, the NWHL is gearing up for next season, which of course makes good sense. So season 6, folks, we're gearing up. We'll keep you posted on what we know. About the Isabel Cup final. Unfortunately, we are still dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. I spoke a little bit about this on the original 8 episode that came out. That is featuring one Elena Orlando. She is a nurse. GamerDoc, as I mentioned, also a physician. So coronavirus is a respiratory, it attacks the respiratory system and unfortunately is very deadly. It can be lethal, especially for folks with pre-existing respiratory conditions and those who are of a vulnerable population age-wise. It's a tough time. People that have been exposed to high danger areas are in quarantine, which basically means that they are asked to stay put in their house for 14 days. Myself, I am practicing social distancing and self-isolation. I live in New York City, so it is highly recommended that I stay inside unless I have to go out. But then there are a whole host of professions, and of course the healthcare profession being among them, that don't have the luxury of working from home. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the conversation. I certainly take that for granted. So thank you to everyone, healthcare profession or not, that is still working. Okay, folks, back to the NWHL. All right, we talked about re-signings. The Isabel Cup final, that's why I got on that coronavirus thing. The Isabel Cup final has been postponed until a later date. We're still hoping that we'll see that. There's a lot of speculation as to what sports is going to look like. We really don't know because once we start seeing things turn around, we have to wait and see the logistics of everything. So we're waiting on the Isabel Cup final. But I alluded to my conversation with Elena Orlando, and I have some good news, folks. As of this week, I have contacted all 8 players from the original 8, In case you haven't noticed, the Founding Four podcast is doing a special series in addition to these weekly roundups of the NWHL. It's called The Original Eight, speaking to all 8 players that have been in the league since season 1, have played all 5 seasons. And very excited that as of this week, we have all of the interviews scheduled. So we should be able to roll on no problem. We've spoken with Kira Dostal Arena, Shannon Doyle, Corrine Bowie. We spoke with Jillian Dempsey. The latest episode or the latest installment of the series is the 5th interview, and that is with Elena Orlando. And coming up next is Kaylee Fratkin. So next week I will drop the Kaylee Fratkin interview. We had a great conversation. It was right after the final was postponed, so she talks a little bit about what the adjustments that she's making have to be. Really excited for you all to hear that. And then we will close out with, as I mentioned, there's only 2 more interviews that I've had to schedule, so that will be Jordan Brickner and Madison Packer. Excited for that. And so the only other things that we really have to talk about now is what next season is gonna look like. And it's still a little premature. Like I said, we still have the Isabel Cup final we have to play, and we're starting to see teams re-sign, which is exciting. The Riveters led the way. Connecticut Whale followed suit. So we'll wait and see, but the off season will take you through the original 8 series. I hope to talk to a few of the general managers, such as the one, the only, Bray Ketchum Peel, and that is who you will hear from in just a moment. Bray Ketchum, of course, won an Isabel Cup with the Riveters. She played with the New York Riveters that then switched over to the Metropolitan Riveters in season 3. She won an Isabel Cup with the Metropolitan Riveters and then retired off into the sunset. Was not active in the league as far as any specific role or capacity in season 4. She did drop a puck for it was for the Mandy Schwartz Foundation at one Riveters game in season 4, but she wasn't playing. She wasn't in any official capacity. In my conversation that you'll hear next, I talked to Bray Ketchum about coming back to the league and why taking on the role of general manager seemed like something that she wanted to do. So Bray is a native of the Nutmeg State, aka Connecticut. Of course, she's a Yale alumna, and now has the first season as general manager of the Connecticut Whale under her belt. We talk roster, we talk coaching, we talk recruitment. I have Bray reflect a little bit on the season that was for the Connecticut Whale, the good, the bad, and what she hopes for next season. So now we're going to hear my interview with Bray Ketchum Peel, general manager of the Connecticut Whale. You make your return to the NWHL, but in a new role, and with a new franchise. So, Bray, just first, let's get started with how did the opportunity to be a general manager in the NWHL come about?
Yeah, so I was looking for a job late last winter when my brother and I closed our business, which was a plant-based protein shake business called Upwild. And I spoke to Danny and Haley a couple times as they were looking for a GM in Connecticut. And, you know, of course, playing in the league, I was like, oh, man, this is totally different. But I definitely want to be back involved in the league that, you know, gave me so much. And obviously I had an amazing experience with the Riveters and just the league in general. So after a couple conversations, I decided to take the role in May of last year and never looked back. And it was a great time to be a part of the league. I think, you know, after the first 3 seasons when I was a part of it, I think it's grown tremendously, you know, adding on Minnesota and hopefully we're able to continue adding on teams. But yeah, I was excited to be a part of season 5.
Yeah, of course, we all know you and love you from your time with the Riveters and capping that playing career off, of course, with the Izzy Cup. But I would imagine that it's a bit of a different ride to be a general manager. So, what were some of the things even before the team hit the ice that were part of that learning curve for you?
Yeah, obviously, I knew a lot of the players that had been on the team, which was helpful. Just getting kind of the lay of the land from them. So, reaching out to those veteran players like Brickner and Doyle and Lando, and just making sure, I totally understood what, the culture they had built, and kind of what they were looking to do in the next couple years with the team. So I think those initial conversations were really helpful. Early on, we obviously ended up moving ranks, which has been kind of an issue with the Whale. And so I was handling a lot of those meetings with Danbury. And then, of course, signing players and doing all the recruiting, which is definitely very interesting and different from what I'm used to. Instead of getting the call, I was making the calls. And so kind of learning that, and also hiring our staff and the coaches was a big part of my role initially. So
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think that it's lost on anyone that you also step into this role when the landscape of women's hockey had changed a lot. And so,
right.
to some extent, you at this point don't know how different things would have been because this was your first go round as a general manager. But as things started to unfold and we realized that there would be a handful of players that had been in the league that were not going to return. I mean, what were some of the ways that you were able to kind of navigate through that as you were new into this role, and who or what were some of the resources that were available to you?
Yeah, so I think it was my first day on the job was when the boycott started. So it was definitely a very eventful first week. But I think, having those conversations with Danny and Haley, and just reinstating to those players that we're talking to about our mission, and, continuing to grow the game, and, you know, just making sure that players had a place to play,
Right.
was, the bottom line, and what we were striving to do. So it was definitely a very interesting summer, and it was a lot of work, and a lot of work that I didn't know I would have to do.
Yeah.
But it was great. I think, having those conversations and building a team of players who really want to be in our league and who really want to continue to grow as players and people. I think, those are the types of people we were wanting to have on the Whale. And I think we did a great job of building that type of roster and that culture in our locker room. So with all the struggles, I think we did a great job, nonetheless, and we'll continue to keep building that this summer.
Yeah, I want to stay there for a minute because you just talked about, of course, going back to some of the veterans in the league that you would have played either with or against in different capacities, and getting an understanding of what their goals were for this franchise, a franchise that, you mentioned Jordan Brickner, you mentioned Shannon Doyle. Quite literally, these are the pioneers of the Connecticut Whale. What do you remember from those conversations, and what did you find illuminating about the way that those two women in particular categorized the franchise?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for them is they wanted, consistency and structure, and they want to win. They have dealt with a lot of adversity with this program, and not having a winning season since I think season one is a lot to handle. And I think that says a lot about the character that they have built in that locker room. And that was a big thing as well, building off that character and the culture they had built in season four, and just continuing to improve, and get the right people involved. I think bringing in Colton was a huge step for the Whale. The girls really responded to him. They they bought into his, his plan, and I think that's huge with a team that's struggling. I think, the trust that they have in the coaching staff and in me, I hope, is very important to success. And I think we showed, later in the season, once Colton was established and when he was back full time, how much we improved. And so I think, building off the positives is really important as we continue to go forward with this franchise.
Yeah, I think that really was on display, certainly towards the latter part of the season, and I want to get to that. But first, I'm going to tease you a little bit here. But that you and those original Riveters certainly hold a special place in my heart and in my family. That's kind of something that we were able to do in that first season, and look at us now, Bray, right? But but I think that there's such a great community here in women's hockey, but in the NWHL community, of course, you were attached and associated with the Riveters, but you, of course, are no stranger to Connecticut. Did you ever find it difficult to maybe balance not necessarily how you viewed your role, but maybe the outward expectations that you felt were associated because you had played in the league and with a different franchise?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a difficult decision to, not only go to Connecticut, but also take on this role. So, but I was excited. I think I knew it was going to be a challenge. I saw firsthand, how much this team had struggled in the past, and I wanted to be a part of that change. And, I think with the right people in place, as I mentioned, we're right there. And I really embraced the challenge, I think. And, I'm continuing to do that as we move into the off season. But, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm still a Riveter at heart, but, I think, now I can be a whale as well. And, no, it's been fun being a part of a different organization and, seeing the way they do things differently. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers it.
Hey, your answer is your answer. I'm not. I'm here to learn from you. I'm all about it. But going into now this Connecticut Whale season, you mentioned Colton, and again, I think the team definitely did respond to him. But another thing that was challenging, while also being exciting for Colton, was that he had engagements that kept him away from the team. So while as one of the analysts or the analyst for the Connecticut Whale, it took us in the booth a little while to get to know Colton. I'm curious, what was the process as far as while he wasn't able to be with the team, what was the communication like within that period of time that you were able to help facilitate, if any?
Yeah, so we were in constant communication with him. He was coming up with the lesson plans for practices, communicating with Laura and Mike Benelli, who helped us as well while he was gone, just to make sure that, we were doing the systems that he wanted eventually once he was there, and to make sure that the girls, knew our game plan before he came in. But yeah, it was definitely a struggle. I think, we obviously starting out, with 10 losses, and it was, I felt bad. I felt like we kind of started the season late, and if we had, a couple more games on the latter end, I think we could have, proved a lot to the league and ourselves. We were right there. I think we peaked at the right time. Thankfully, in this league, you can peak in the last game and still go on to do good things in the Isabel Cup. So, yeah, I think having him for a whole season definitely would have been helpful. But I think the girls responded well and appropriately, when he did come in.
Hey everyone, taking a short break from my amazing interview with Bray Ketchum Peel, Connecticut Whale manager, to drop a little audio clip for anyone that is interested in more women's history around sports. Over on my Patreon page, Sports Talk with ELA, I post on Wednesdays interviews with women who have been integral to the growth of their specific sport or sports in general. One person that definitely fits the bill in that capacity is Digit Murphy. For my Patreon posse, I posted my full interview with Digit Murphy. We talk about so many things. She has great insight on so many things. But the one thing that Digit Murphy really wants to see is a difference of approach when it comes to how to think about and how to market women's sports. Here's a little clip from my interview with Digit Murphy.
Like we just think that because the men do it, it's the right thing. It's not. Sometimes it's not. It's okay to be different. That's where we really have to go. And it's so frustrating for me to watch, the women so badly in the PWH, whatever the acronym is.
PWHPA.
Yeah. It's painful for me to watch them just beg to be picked up with the NHL. It's to me, it's beneath them. They're so good on their own. They're so talented. They don't even know what they have. And if they could figure out what they have and how to package it, that's the secret sauce. But they just want to be in the game. And I remember that feeling. So I get it when I was young. I get it. I just know with all the experience I have that there's another way and a better way that can help everyone.
Yeah, I think, whether it's the PWHPA or the NWHL, I think that there is residue there. I think it's all women's sports, to be honest. Even with the WNBA and their latest CBA, which of course is groundbreaking for their league and has a lot of, potentially could have a lot of impact on women's sports. I think one thing that really bothered me about the conversation was this insistence on using one particular phrase over and over, and you've seen it permeate through all sports, is like, we're not expecting to get paid like the men. And you know what? That's true.
Just don't say anything.
Exactly.
Because they always have to be thinking about men.
So again, if you want to hear this full interview and more sit-downs with women who have made an impact in sport over the years, head over to Sports Talk with ELA, click on the subscribe at the $7 level, and you will be guaranteed to get all of my interviews for Women's History Wednesdays. For those who already subscribe to Patreon, thank you so much. I hope that you see that we're building things out. For those of you who aren't, I would love for you to join the Patreon posse. But at minimum, please make sure you're liking, subscribing, rating, and reviewing the Founding Four podcast. Let's get back to my interview with Bray Ketchum Peel. Yeah, again, you mentioned that record, and it's tough because, and I've spoken to Doyle about this. She makes no qualms. It is difficult. It's difficult to have the record that the Whale has had in franchise history. It's difficult, though. This season, and I asked Doyle this. I asked Orlando this. Is it any different? If I'm going to be 100% blunt, is it different to get a loss in a blowout versus taking so many top tier teams? Two teams that are going to eventually play in the Isabel Cup final. If you look at down the stretch, or just overall in the season, how you played Minnesota. Right. Those were great games. Look at what the Connecticut Whale was able to do as far as really putting that winning streak that Boston had in serious jeopardy, to be the first team to do that and to take them into overtime and eventual shootout. Is it tougher to lose that way? I don't know. What's the psychology behind that, Bray?
I think losing in a blowout's way worse than losing in overtime. But at the same time, it's I don't know, because those games where we took Boston to overtime, where we lost those one goal games to Minnesota, those are, I mean, partly equally as tough to lose, just because you're right there.
Yeah.
Whereas in a blowout, you're not there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we were so proud of ourselves and our team when we, had those close games. And unfortunately, it was most of the season that we had a lot of those close games, which was really frustrating. But, again, the girls were resilient. They continue to work and improve. And, hopefully we can change those L's into W's next year.
I'm sure everyone will be excited about that, certainly in Connecticut. But going back to this Connecticut Whale team, I want to go back a little bit just to the recruitment. We talked about this a lot on the broadcast. Connecticut has always been a team that, even in that first season where they had a lot of offensive firepower, goaltending I think is certainly a staple of this franchise. So when you knew you had Laura coming back, and as you were starting to build the roster with the inquiries that you had, some of the scouting that you had done, talk to me about settling in on the trio of goalies that we saw this season.
Yeah, well, Laura actually, I will give her credit for that. She did a lot of recruiting on her own and, with my help, obviously, but she really brought in those three goalies. And, we were really impressed with how Brooke played, Sonia as well. And when Casper, got her chances, she also showed up.
Yeah.
We thankfully have a great group of goalies, and they were really encouraging for one another. They work together as one, and I think that's really helpful when it comes to goalies, because it is tricky when one of them's starting a lot more than the other, and to keep motivating each other is hard. So we were really thankful that we had this group, and we'll hopefully have them again next season. But yeah, Brooke proved to a lot of people that she was our number one, and Sonia was just right there behind her, and if not, our number one as well. So it's great to have that competition amongst the goalies, which I think Laura will attest to as well.
Yeah, it definitely made for an interesting season, and I've spoken to Brooke and Sonia throughout the season, and it seems like if you're lucky, I suppose, when you have a healthy competition between your goalies, I think that the goalies respect and appreciate that, and from any indication that those two gave in particular, as you mentioned, Cass as well, that there is a mutual respect, and you're always hungry to prove what you've got, but also understand that there's a bigger picture, and you want to fall in line with that. So I think that has continued to be a part of, again, this franchise when it comes to the Connecticut Whale. Another piece of that, of course, is the defense. And you mentioned, of course, prioritizing Brickner and Doyle, Elena Orlando as a part of that. Taylor Marchand, I think, came in, it doesn't have as many years under her belt as those others, but has proved to be someone that, is a leader as far as the blue line. The challenge, though, always with Connecticut, let's talk about this season, has certainly been that you have such skilled defenders, but I think also there was a little bit of a struggle in finding the team identity when it came to being in the D zone, and then how to translate that into productive offense. So what do you remember some of the conversations being with the team as the season went on? Because that did improve, and that improved. There were changes made at goalie. There were obviously some forwards brought into the mix, but what were you maybe looking for that you didn't see early in the season that you think you got close to, as you said earlier, when the team started to really hit their stride?
Yeah, let's not forget also Hannah Beatty stepping in huge, as a big defender this year.
That's
When
right.
we lost Brickner, unfortunately. But yeah, we were really fortunate to have, a core defense group, and then bringing in, Brenna and Laurel later in the season, which helped with the depth. But I think, our conversations earlier on, obviously we spent a lot of time in the D zone to start the season. And thankfully we have girls who love to block shots and who are relentless in the corners. And, as you mentioned, our D are kind of, the core of our team. And so I think towards the end of the season, we were stressing being hard to play, and really stressing, a strong forecheck. Getting in teams' faces, I think, was the biggest thing for us. If we weren't going to have all the skill in the world, we were going to be hard to play, and we wanted teams to struggle to get those W's against us. So I think, our D were a huge asset to our team this year, and but I think knowing how hard they work, I think the forwards, wanted to reward them as well. So it was a great team effort all around, I think, as we went along.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that veteran presence. And yes, thank you for reminding us of Hannah Beatty, who I think has played, since she came to this franchise, she was one of those players that as her college season was winding down at the time, I believe it was under Ryan Equali, who was able to sign up in the middle of the NWHL season, and has kind of played a utility for this team in her time in the NWHL. But I think what was great is, again, down the stretch, as you're able to get those 2 wins down the stretch going into the playoffs. I mean, Hannah Beatty was one of those players that really was able to get the team through and into the semifinal game. When you see players, and the Connecticut Whale, save for that first season, hasn't necessarily been a team littered with, nationally recognized hockey players. Definitely more of a regional team. When you see players like Beatty be able to step up, I mean, Schwensfire, I think, if you're maybe someone that doesn't get to watch Connecticut as much as I do, you might be a little bit surprised about what she was able to do in pockets. I mean, Bennigan, when she was able to hit the ice, another player as well. But when you see players like that be able to step up, again, it's a grinded out type of franchise. It's a tough season, losing by one goal here and there. What do you make of are you surprised, I should say, by what you see as the final product that we get to see on the ice?
I mean, Hannah I knew she would be a huge part of our team, no matter where she was. She brings so much energy and love for hockey every day that she just wants to be out there, and she wants to help her teammates, and that's just her personality. And she impressed me a lot. And I think the same goes for Laura and Colton. She was, in the top 4 in our defense, and if not top 2, and she rose to the occasion, and she scored some big goals for us down the road. So it was, I think she might have been our MVP this year. And it's people like her that you want on your team. No matter if you're winning or losing, she always is positive, always bringing up those around her. And, she's a role player, and she's really stepped up to the role that we put her in this year. And, hopefully she'll continue to do so as a Whale. And, same goes, as you said, Schwensfire's, similar. Casey Anderson, Grace, they all stepped up this year, and I think they really found their game, and they became more confident. They were all scoring goals, making big assists. So I think it's a confidence thing with a lot of them. And as the year went on, I think they all realized that they're all very good hockey players. So they deserve to be in this league, and they were a huge part of our success.
Yeah, and I want to go to also some of the signings that you brought in, and you mentioned, of course, Laurel, but But you also brought in someone that you know very well, NWHL players, or fans, excuse me, and players know pretty well, and that's one Janine Weber. So you got to break down, how'd you get Weber J9 back into the fold?
Yeah. At first, when we started talking, she was like, "Well, I'll play if you play," and I was like, "Well, Janine, this isn't gonna work."
So that's why it took so long, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I can't. No, yeah, I reached out to her earlier in the year when we were still looking for forwards, and she was, really busy with her work. She works at a charter school and obviously lives in Providence, so it's kind of far from Danbury. But I think after a few conversations, she finally, realized like she misses hockey and misses being on a team, and so we brought her out to a practice, and I mean, I don't think she looked back. So she was a great addition. I think she finally got her legs back, and she's so talented and so strong up front, and I think it really showed in her last couple games. So, hopefully she'll want to play again next year. But yeah, that was an interesting few conversations, but I'm glad I finally squeezed it out of her. And now she's, hoping to be back on Team Austria and get back in the swing of things. So, I guess even if you retire, you can always come back.
Yeah, well, I think we definitely know that we've had our fair share of retirements, and then
Exactly.
Michael Jordan 45 comebacks, so including freaking Ashley Johnston came back.
Yeah, I know.
That was exciting. I was like, who else is coming? Let's just bring them all back. Bring them all back. But I think we could go, I mean, game for game, and just some of the amazing things that happen with this Connecticut team, excuse me. But also, I try to keep it real. I love and adore you, but there were also challenges. But I think you also alluded to this earlier. The biggest challenge for this Connecticut team, I'd say there's two. One is, well, they're actually related, but one is personnel and one is location. There's just been so much turnover. It just seems like if the roster has some consistency, then the rink is moving. And if the rink stays the same, then the roster, is upended. So that presents a challenge for you. And again, we talked about the circumstances of you coming in as a GM were certainly different than anyone else and unprecedented in the history of this league. But I would imagine that some of that consistency is something that you're going to want
definitely
for next season. So what does that look like for you as we are, well, at least for Connecticut, we still have one NWHL game left.
I know.
Fingers crossed we'll get it. But, you and your team, you ended this season, another great battle. But that season came to an end at Warrior Ice Arena. I mean, we're a few weeks removed from that last game on March 8th. But, what are the next steps for you, Bray, when it comes to, again, really trying to establish that consistency and then building this franchise from there?
Yeah, I mean, Laura, Colt, and I have already, been having conversations quite a few times a week. We are, talking to college coaches, talking to players, so actively recruiting. And, at the end of the day, we want to keep the core group that we have. And I think they played a huge and important role, especially this year, in our success. So, I don't foresee the roster changing exponentially, but I think, bringing in a couple, top forwards and top defensemen is what we're looking for. So, hopefully, staying in Danbury and keeping the roster somewhat similar will be, consistent enough for these girls. But, as we all know, professional teams and sports, everything changes every day. So, I think you kind of have to accept that and move on. And, I think at the end of the day, every player understands that what Colton, Laura, and I are trying to do is build the best possible team. We want to win the Isabel Cup next year. So no matter how we get there, I would think the players would support our decisions. And so, yeah, that's the goal, and hopefully we can do that this summer and build the best roster we can.
Yeah, and I'll get you out of here on just a few more. But Bray, as you well know, women's sports, I would argue generally, but certainly women's hockey, there is a little bit of cheerleading and advocating that you have to do for the sport. And so I'm curious, what are some of the messages that you hope to get across to not just the roster that you were able to put on the ice this season, but for fans? You're still trying to build a more consistent fan base, at least in the arena. I think Whale fans are spread out all around the country and North America, which is exciting. But, you still want to be able to tap into that history of hockey in the Nutmeg State, I'm sure. So what type of messages would you like to get out, on this very popular women's hockey podcast to some of the fans listening, fans of yours, fans of your players, and fans of the franchise? For what you're expecting and what you really want to put out there for next season that they should be excited about?
Yeah, they'll definitely see the same exciting, Whale games. I think bigger and better team is what we're hoping for. But yeah, we wouldn't be here without our fans. So we appreciate all of you who listen to this and all of you who follow our games and come to our games. And I think, the biggest thing is we want to keep improving. And hopefully with a goal of finishing, number 1 or number 2 in the standings is something we can do come next year. So stay tuned.
Once we know, again, how the 2020 season ends and we get indication of what 2021 will look like, we'll have to check back in with general manager of the Connecticut Whale, Bray Ketchum. Bray Ketchum Peel, I should say. And happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
And I hope you and yours are staying safe and healthy as we get through these trying times for all of us.
Yes, thank you, and you as well.
Appreciate it. All right, folks, that will do it for this episode of the Founding Four podcast. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to our weekly independent women's hockey podcast. We put all of this together because of our Patreon posse and also because fans like you who listen in and share the great work and share the lovely stories that we get to tell here at the Founding Four pod. As I mentioned, next week I will drop for the original 8 series my interview with Kaylee Fratkin, and on the traditional episode of the Founding Four pod, I will give you any updates that we hear about the Isabel Cup final, if there are any re-signings, and hope to have another fun interview for you to follow along with. Until then, please stay healthy. And if you need something to binge watch, go watch old NWHL games. Watch NWHL Open Ice. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the Founding Four podcast and listen to some of our old episodes. I'm in the process of archiving some of the episodes that I had before, along with my co-host Mike Murphy, so stay tuned for that project as it develops. All right, until next week, later!